Hello everyone, my name is Yoon and this is the long-awaited Greyglish 2.0 video tutorial. This tutorial will walk users through how to create and use Greyglish 2.0 voice banks. Greyglish 2.0 is an alternative reclist to Greyglish 1.0. Though the Xsampa aliasing is the same, Greyglish 2.0 samples are primarily recorded in a two-syllable format as opposed to the longer strings in Greyglish 1.0. This allows for the addition of beginning CVs and a distinction between them and middle CVs. If you are already familiar with Xsampa and Greyglish 1.0, you will have an easy time with 2.0. This tutorial is recommended to intermediate users that already have general knowledge of how to create voice banks, as well as prior experience using English voice banks. Although everything will be covered step by step, it is expected that the users following this tutorial have most of the preemptive knowledge about Utao already. Some pieces of information that were included in Greyglish 1.0's tutorial were cut from this one, as very basic instructions like how to change locale, choosing resamplers, etc. are assumed to already be known about by the user. The previous guide can be referenced in conjunction to this one. When downloading the package for this reclist, you will find the following: the Greyglish 2 full reclist and full OREMO reclist, the Greyglish 2.0 guide PDF, VCCV to Greyglish 2 and ARPAsing to Greyglish 2 replace list for Ito 2, and a how to use guide for both. Various recording samples in WAV format, base OTO-INI files suffixed and non-suffixed, a VLabeler base project file, the sample UST and USTX, and a replacement English xsampa.yaml file. All of these will be explained in detail over the course of this video. For the ideal setup, you want to make a new folder for your voice bank. If you haven't already, I also recommend pointing all your downloaded voice banks to the same root folder so they're all in one place. If the bank is monopitch, only one root folder in the voice bank is needed, but if you are creating a multi-pitch voice bank, you need to create subfolders in the bank's root folder for each individual pitch you record. Preferably, all recorded samples should be in their own folder or folders, and any voice bank extras like images, text files, things like that should stay in the root folder. For the recording process, OREMO is the recommended program that I use for recording samples. You can use whichever recording method is easiest for you if you like an alternative, but I have provided the download to OREMO in this as well. Like I said earlier, I've included an OREMO reclist for Greyglish 2.0 as well as just a blank reclist. If at any point you're unsure how a string should be recorded, please refer to the example recordings folder or any voice bank that uses Greyglish 2.0. You can also use Greyglish 1.0 banks for comparison for pronunciation and to make sure you're getting it right, but if you want the most accurate comparison possible, currently, the only publicly available bank that uses Greyglish 2.0 specifically is Ichigo Honda, though any succeeding English banks that I make will utilize the Greyglish 2.0 reclist. The standalone vowels in Greyglish 2.0 are formatted a little bit differently, though they have basically the same principle as the standalone vowels from 1.0. So out of standalone vowels, you are going to get a beginning vowel, a middle same vowel transition, and an ending vowel that goes at the end of the phrase. So that should sound like this. Differing vowel-vowel transitions are recorded the same way as vowel strings in VCV, as well as the same way they're recorded in 1.0, so these are not changed, so they will follow the same format generally. So a typical vowel-vowel string should sound like this. The main CV and VC portion of the reclist is recorded in a two-syllable CVVC manner, so if you're familiar with any CVVC kind of reclist or VCCV English, this is recorded the same way, though some of the samples will be different. It's an Xsampa. So a typical CVVC chunk is going to sound like this. Gong, gong. Consonant clusters, or CCs, are recorded the same way as Greyglish 1.0, so these are not changed either. They are recorded in the exact same manner, they're laid out the same way. So these do differ in length some, but they are recorded generally the same way in the same principle. So a typical CC string is going to sound like this.
Ketched, kext, kex, kekt, kelm.
And lastly, the miscellaneous recordings that have phonemes like bu, hu, etc. are recorded the same way as Greyglish 1.0, so that's also unchanged. And a typical recording of those should sound like this. Bu, du, few, gu. When you finish recording, the recommended auto creation method for me that I like to use is VLabeler. Now, you know me, I've autoed in Utao Classic for a number of years, but VLabeler makes it easy because you can actually tag different types of samples, like if you want to distinguish vowels from consonants and things like that, which is great because I like to work in different chunks of the rec list than what will be automatically sorted alphabetically. I have also included a template project with VLabeler, so all sections are pre-marked. You just have to load in your individual bank and point it to the OTO-INI that's in its folder. And all OTOs, unfortunately, do need to be manually adjusted after the base is applied, even if you're using Guide BGM, because it still needs the human oversight, because there are likely still going to be errors, no matter how accurately you try to do it. I'm sorry, that's just how it is. Now, depending on if your bank is monopitch or multi-pitch will determine which OTO you actually use. So the OTO with suffixes can be used for multi-pitch. You can find and replace the pitch in Notepad, or VLabeler also has a function to do this in the program as well, but it definitely will make your life easier if you go with the base OTO. VLabeler does allow for custom coloring, so my default might not be what yours is, but this is the basic terminology that's going to be showing up throughout explaining how to OTO. So the green line is the overlap. This usually gets placed somewhere halfway or behind the pre-utterance, which is this red line. Red line should always go right before the consonant or vowel or whatever is said. The yellow at the beginning is the offset. This is cutting off all the silence in the beginning and telling where the note's actually supposed to start. And then, you can't see it in this picture, but the white at the end of the note will be the cutoff. And then this consonant area is going to depend on what you're OTOing, but we'll explain that a bit later. So standalone vowels pretty much OTO'd the same way as standalone vowels in Greyglish, though they're aliased a bit differently. Instead of using the underscore, just the vowel copied twice with the space is what is used. So it should appear pretty much the same way as it does in 1.0. Now, vowel-vowel transitions are configured the same way as they are in VCV or anything that uses those kind of VCV vowels, so that is unchanged from 1.0. Now, the main CV and VC chunk of the rec list is configured pretty much the same way that you will configure CV-VC for any other language, or like VC-CV English does this too. So you'll have one for the beginning CV, one for the middle VC, and then one for the middle CV, and then one for the end. Also, Greyglish 2.0 only uses one VC instead of having the long one and the short one in 1.0. You're free to add this if you want to, but I didn't really think it was that necessary, so I only pared it down to just the one. And then consonant clusters, again, unchanged from the way that Greyglish 1.0 is done. There are starting CCs for some, but ending ones pretty much edited just the same way that you would do it in any other kind of rec list that uses this particular format. And then the miscellaneous, that's the hue view again, they're configured the same way as Greyglish 1.0. I personally like to have the hue and then the long hue for these kinds of notes because they make it a bit simpler than having to chop up the note, but it's up to you if you want to stick with that. For bank testing, once you have gotten through the mountain of OTO, sorry about that by the way, first I'll show you how to do it in Utao Classic, and then I will bounce over to OpenUtao. So we're going to open the sample UST, that's file open sample UST folder, and then double click, load in your voice bank, fit the UST, put on whatever flags you need, and then hopefully you should have a result that sounds something like this.
Take me to church, I'll worship like a dog at the shrine of your place. I'll tell you my sins so you can sharpen your knife. Offer me that deathless death, oh good God, let me give you my life. Take me to church, I'll worship like a dog at the shrine of your place. I'll tell you my sins so you can sharpen your knife. Offer me that deathless death, oh good God, let me give you my life.
Now, I primarily use my Greyglish banks in Utao Classic. Luckily, with the plugin Ito 2, you can use replace lists to replace VCCV or ARPA-Sing phonemes with Greyglish X Sampa. So what you do for that is you make sure Ito 2 is installed, and with the English patch, then you're going to copy the 2 text files for the replace list, and then find Ito 2's plugin folder, open the replace folder, then I put in Tcon just for convenience. So paste them there, and then you might need to reload your plugins folder after doing this, just to make sure that the change is implemented. And then you're just going to open up Utao, and then whether it's a VCCV English or ARPA-Sing UST, just open one of those, and then select all or just the portion of the UST's notes you're converting, and then open up Ito 2, select replace by list. In the replacement drop-down menu, select the VCCV to Greyglish 2 or ARPA-Sing to Greyglish 2 option, just depending on what the UST you originally loaded in was, and then press OK in that menu and OK in the main menu to change the phonemes. Now, conversion isn't always going to be accurate, but it does assist in conversion. It'll help you familiarize the X Sampa, and it'll cut down having to manually adjust these all yourself. Now, while the same method can be used in OpenUtao when using Ito 2 as a legacy plugin, it's easier in OpenUtao to use the Phonemizer. Now, OpenUtao already has a built-in X Sampa Phonemizer, but the YAML file, we need to use a different one to specify replacements and fallbacks that aren't in the default X Sampa Phonemizer. So you're going to open up OpenUtao, put your singer in, and then select the Phonemizer on the USTX and make sure it's in X Sampa. And then in OU's plugin folder, replace the enxsampa.yml with the one provided. Now, this might not be accurate. This is a very new feature that's been rolled out at the time of making this recording, so if it doesn't work for you, it also rarely works for me. It should be at least a bit better of a guide to getting the phonemes that you want in this Phonemizer without having to just manually put it down everything. Alright, so that should be everything. Hopefully I covered everything that needed to be in this tutorial. Now, if at any time you need clarification or have a question, I can be reached directly on any site I'm on, though email and Discord contact are preferred. Anyway, I wish you luck with your Greyglish voice bank creations. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you the next time I upload.